My stepmom called me the family charity case at Thanksgiving dinner while wearing the $15,000 bracelet I paid for. She had no idea that every luxury she flaunted, every social status she climbed, every condescending smile she threw my way was built on money that flowed directly from my bank account. For 3 years, I'd watched her treat me like I was some burden my father had to carry, all while I quietly funded the life she used to humiliate me. But empires built on lies have a way of crumbling, and I'd made sure every transaction, every transfer, every dollar had a paper trail that led straight back to the truth she never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya Chen, and at 29, I'd built a career most people spend decades chasing. As a senior financial analyst at Sterling & Associates, one of Colorado's most exclusive wealth management firms, I handled portfolios that would make most people dizzy. My clients trusted me with generational wealth, and I'd earned every bit of that trust through careful planning, strategic thinking, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I managed millions for strangers, my own family had no idea I was the reason they still had a roof over their heads. Riverside Heights was the kind of community where appearances meant everything. Manicured lawns, luxury vehicles in every driveway, and enough passive aggression at the country club to fuel a reality television series. My father had moved here after marrying Vanessa 3 years ago, trading our modest but warm childhood home for this showcase property in a gated community. He thought he was giving us an upgrade. What he'd actually done was hand his new wife the stage she'd been craving her entire life. Dad had been a high school history teacher for 30 years, the kind who remembered every student's name and stayed late for extra help. He retired early after a heart condition made the stress unbearable, and that's when everything shifted. His pension covered the basics, barely, but Vanessa had expensive tastes that didn't align with a teacher's retirement income. That's where I came in, though nobody knew it. Not even Dad. The arrangement had started innocently enough. Dad needed help with some medical bills his insurance wouldn't cover. I set up what I told him was a charitable medical fund, anonymous donors helping retired educators. He'd been so grateful, so relieved, that I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. That his daughter, the one Vanessa constantly dismissed as living in a cramped apartment and working some boring office job, was the anonymous donor. From there, it snowballed. The mortgage was underwater, so I restructured it through a trust. The country club membership Vanessa deemed essential for their social standing went on a credit card I paid off monthly. The luxury SUV she drove had a loan I serviced without anyone's knowledge. I'd created an intricate financial web that kept my father comfortable and Vanessa oblivious, all while maintaining my own deliberately modest lifestyle. My apartment was small, but it was in a nice area downtown, close to my office. I drove a reliable sedan that was 5 years old. I bought my clothes at normal stores, not the boutiques Vanessa frequented. To anyone looking from the outside, especially Vanessa, I was exactly what she called me behind my back and sometimes to my face, unremarkable. That Thanksgiving dinner should have been a warning that things were about to change. We'd gathered at the family estate, the one with the sweeping staircase and the chef's kitchen Vanessa loved to show off despite never cooking in it. She'd invited her entire social circle, turning what should have been an intimate family meal into another opportunity to display her perceived status. I'd arrived in my usual understated fashion, bringing wine and homemade pumpkin pie, the recipe my late mother had perfected over years of practice. Vanessa had looked at my contribution with barely concealed disdain before setting it on the far end of the dessert table, prominently displaying the elaborate cake she'd ordered from the most expensive bakery in Riverside Heights. Throughout dinner, she held court at one end of the table while Dad sat quietly at the other, looking tired in a way that worried me. Her friends, women who measured worth in handbag brands and vacation destinations, laughed at her stories and complimented her impeccable taste. She was in her element, the queen of her carefully constructed kingdom. That's when her friend Margaret asked about me, probably out of polite obligation more than genuine interest. "Oh, that's Robert's daughter Maya," Vanessa had said with a wave of her hand that made the diamond bracelet catch the light. "She works in some office downtown doing something with numbers. We're just glad she's managing to support herself, finally. It's been quite the journey, hasn't it, Maya?" Bless her heart, she tries so hard. The table had gone quiet for just a moment, that awkward silence that happens when someone says something cruel disguised as concern. Dad had started to object, but Vanessa steamrolled over him with practiced ease, changing the subject to their upcoming holiday party and how they'd secured a celebrity chef for the catering. I'd sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, looking at that $15,000 bracelet I'd purchased through a jewelry broker and had delivered as an anonymous gift for her birthday 2 months earlier. The card had said it was from a secret admirer. She'd spent weeks trying to figure out who her mysterious benefactor was, never once considering it might be the family charity case sitting across from her. Something crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear as the Waterford crystal she'd insisted on registering for when she married Dad. I'd spent 3 years protecting my father's dignity, ensuring he never had to admit to his new wife that his pension couldn't support her lifestyle, keeping the peace by keeping secrets. And this was how she repaid that invisible generosity, with public humiliation and private contempt. I'd finished my dinner in silence, helped Dad clean up while Vanessa entertained her guests in the living room, and drove home to my small apartment with a decision forming in my mind. The paper trail I'd been maintaining for financial protection was about to become something else entirely. Evidence. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I arrived at Sterling & Associates with a new sense of purpose. My corner office on the 23rd floor overlooked downtown Riverside Heights, glass and steel stretching toward mountains in the distance. Most people thought financial analysis was dry work, just numbers on spreadsheets and predictable patterns. They didn't understand that money tells stories, and I'd become fluent in reading between the lines of bank statements and transaction histories. I started pulling records I'd been keeping in a secure folder on my encrypted drive. 3 years of payments, transfers, and carefully documented expenses. The mortgage payments that went through a trust I'd established under a corporate name. The country club dues charged to a business account I controlled. The credit card statements for Vanessa's shopping sprees at boutiques in Denver, all paid from an LLC I'd created specifically for this purpose. Every single transaction had been legitimate, legal, and completely invisible to the people benefiting from them. What I hadn't anticipated was how much the amounts would add up to when I finally compiled them into a master spreadsheet. Over the course of 3 years, I'd funneled nearly $400,000 into maintaining the lifestyle Vanessa believed was funded by my father's modest pension and some vague investments she never bothered to understand. $400,000 that had purchased her social standing, her wardrobe, her jewelry, and her ability to look down on me as someone who hadn't made anything of herself. The medical expenses alone were staggering. Dad's heart condition required expensive medications and regular specialist visits. His insurance covered some of it, but the copays and out-of-pocket maximums would have bankrupted him within the first year. I'd established what I'd told him was a retired educator's health fund, complete with official-looking paperwork and a website I'd paid a designer to create. He submitted his bills to this phantom charity, and I processed them through one of my business accounts. He thought generous strangers were helping him. In reality, his daughter was making sure he never had to choose between his health and keeping his wife happy. The house was the biggest expense. Dad had purchased it right after marrying Vanessa, stretching himself thin to afford the down payment on a property that screamed success in all the ways their previous home hadn't. Within 6 months, he was drowning. The mortgage payment was 3 times what he'd anticipated after property taxes and insurance were factored in. He'd been too proud to tell me directly, but I'd seen the stress in his face during our weekly lunches, the way he'd started looking older than his 58 years. I'd approached him with a solution disguised as an opportunity. A financial restructuring program for retirees, I'd explained, that could significantly reduce his monthly obligations through a specialized trust arrangement. All legal, all legitimate, just some creative financial planning. What I hadn't mentioned was that the trust was mine, that I'd essentially bought the mortgage from the bank and was now his actual lender, charging him a fraction of the monthly payment while I covered the difference. He thought he'd gotten lucky with some innovative retirement program. Vanessa thought they owned the house outright, because I'd let that assumption stand uncorrected. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Lunch this week? Vanessa wants to talk to you about something." The message made my stomach tighten. Vanessa never wanted to talk to me unless she needed something or wanted to deliver some veiled criticism in person. I texted back confirming Wednesday, then returned to my spreadsheets with renewed focus. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd created a comprehensive financial portrait of the Chin family finances, or more accurately, the Maya Chin subsidy program that had been operating in secret for 36 months. I'd categorized everything: housing costs, medical expenses, lifestyle expenditures, luxury purchases, and what I'd labeled as pure vanity spending. That last category included things like the $15,000 bracelet, a custom closet renovation Vanessa had insisted was essential, and a series of spa weekends she'd taken with her country club friends. I met Dad at our usual spot, a quiet Italian restaurant halfway between his house and my office. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than just needing sleep. He'd lost weight, and there was a tremor in his hands when he reached for his water glass that hadn't been there 6 months ago. It made my chest ache to see him this way, worn down by stress he shouldn't have to carry. Before I could ask about his health, Vanessa's name appeared on the hostess stand as she swept into the restaurant 15 minutes late, trailing perfume expensive enough to announce itself across the room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She dressed for lunch like it was a fashion show, all designer labels and strategic accessories. The handbag alone cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I knew exactly how much because I'd seen the credit card charge last month. She air-kissed Dad's cheek and gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes before settling into her chair with the kind of dramatic sigh that demanded attention. "This place is so quaint," she said, glancing around the family-owned restaurant like it was beneath her standards. "We really should introduce you to some nicer establishments, Robert. First impressions matter, especially in our position." Our position. As if Dad's retired teacher status and her former career selling mid-range condos had somehow elevated them to society royalty. I watched her open the menu, already knowing she'd order the most expensive item and barely touch it, a performance she'd perfected over countless meals I'd indirectly funded. "So Maya," she began after the server took our orders, "your father and I have been discussing your situation, and we've decided it's time for an intervention of sorts." "My situation," I repeated carefully, keeping my voice neutral. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not on board with whatever Vanessa had planned but too tired to fight her. "You're almost 30, dear, and you're still living in that tiny apartment, working at that office job that clearly isn't taking you anywhere." She paused to sip her wine, a vintage I recognized as one of the more expensive options. "We think it's time you considered your future more seriously. Perhaps went back to school for something more ambitious, or at least tried to network into a position with better prospects. You can't rely on your father forever, you know. We won't always be here to help support you." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with the steak knife being placed beside my plate. Support me. The woman whose entire lifestyle I'd been bankrolling for 3 years was sitting across from me expressing concern about my need for support. Dad was staring at his plate, clearly mortified, but Vanessa was just getting started. "In fact," she continued, "we'd like to help you get on your feet properly. We're prepared to offer you a small loan, maybe $10,000, to help with professional development or perhaps updating your wardrobe for better job interviews. Consider it an investment in your future, though of course we'd need you to pay it back once you're more established." She smiled like she'd just offered me a life raft instead of an insult wrapped in condescension. I looked at my father, seeing the shame in his eyes that he was allowing this to happen. Then I looked at Vanessa, resplendent in her ignorance, so certain of her superiority that she couldn't see the foundation beneath her was built entirely on my generosity. The server arrived with our meals, and I made a decision that had been building since Thanksgiving dinner. It was time to start pulling threads and watching the whole carefully constructed illusion unravel. I declined the loan with a polite smile that masked the calculation happening behind my eyes. "That's very generous, Vanessa, but I'm managing just fine. My job is actually quite stable." She'd waved that away with another flutter of her manicured hand, clearly disappointed that I hadn't fallen over myself with gratitude. The rest of the lunch passed in uncomfortable small talk, with Dad asking safe questions about work and Vanessa checking her phone constantly, already bored now that her charitable gesture had been rejected. After lunch, I returned to my office and made a call I'd been considering for months. Gregory Blackwell was one of my oldest clients, a self-made technology entrepreneur who'd sold his company for a fortune in the 90s and spent the subsequent decades managing his wealth with the same sharp intelligence that had built it in the first place. At 73, he was sharper than most people half his age and had a particular talent for reading situations others missed. We'd developed a rapport that went beyond the typical client-advisor relationship. He reminded me of what my own grandfather might have been like, if I'd ever known him. Gregory had no patience for pretension or social climbing, which was probably why he lived alone in his sprawling manor on the outskirts of Riverside Heights, avoiding the country club set entirely despite having more money than all of them combined. I'd scheduled a portfolio review, but when I arrived at Blackwell Manor that Thursday evening, he took one look at my face and poured us both a drink instead. His study was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books that had actually been read, their spines cracked and pages worn. It was the kind of room that invited honesty, and before I'd planned to, the whole story came tumbling out. Gregory listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin, those keen eyes missing nothing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "So let me understand this correctly," he finally said. "You've been anonymously funding your father's entire lifestyle for 3 years, including supporting a woman who treats you with open contempt, and neither of them has any idea you're the source of their financial stability." When he put it that way, it sounded even more absurd than it felt. I'd been so focused on protecting Dad's pride and keeping the peace that I hadn't stopped to consider how the situation looked from the outside. "I thought I was helping," I said quietly. "I thought I was protecting him from stress, from having to admit to his new wife that he couldn't afford her expectations." Gregory set down his glass with a decisive click. "What you were doing, Maya, was enabling a parasitic relationship while allowing yourself to be demeaned. There's a difference between generosity and being taken advantage of, even if the person doing the taking doesn't realize they're doing it." He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a leather portfolio. "I've seen this pattern before. I had a nephew who did something similar, funded his ex-wife's lifestyle for years out of misplaced guilt. Do you know what finally stopped it?" I shook my head. He showed her the receipts. Sometimes people need to see exactly what they've been taking for granted before they understand what they're about to lose. Gregory opened the portfolio, revealing business cards and contact information. "I'm going to give you some names. A forensic accountant who specializes in family financial disputes, and an attorney who handles these situations with the discretion they require." "I don't want to sue anyone," I protested. "I just want Vanessa to understand that she's been wrong about me, that I'm not some failure she gets to pity." "That's not about lawsuits," he said firmly. "That's about documentation and protection. If you're going to reveal this situation, and I think you should, you need to do it properly. You need to protect yourself legally, make sure all your financial arrangements are airtight, and have professional backing when the inevitable explosion occurs." He handed me a card for Patricia Nguyen, an attorney whose office was in the same downtown building as Sterling and Associates. "Call her tomorrow. Tell her I sent you and that you need a consultation about unwinding a complex family financial support structure. She'll understand immediately." Then he gave me another card for Marcus Rodriguez, a private investigator who apparently specialized in financial forensics. "Why would I need an investigator?" I asked. "I already have all the records." Gregory smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Because you have your side of the story, Maya. But when this comes out, and it will come out now that you've reached this point, Vanessa is going to have her version too. You need someone who can document not just the money, but the whole picture. The lifestyle, the social climbing, the public displays funded by private generosity. Context matters in these situations." I left Blackwell Manor with those business cards and a different perspective on the situation I'd created. By Friday morning, I'd called both numbers and scheduled appointments. Patricia Nguyen could see me Monday afternoon. Marcus Rodriguez was available for a preliminary consultation over the weekend. Things were moving faster than I'd anticipated, gaining momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. Saturday morning, I met Marcus at a coffee shop downtown called the Daily Grind, neutral territory where we could talk without being observed by anyone from Vanessa's social circle. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with an unassuming appearance that probably served him well in his line of work. People underestimated him, just like they underestimated me. I showed him the compiled financial records on my laptop, 3 years of payments and transfers organized into categories with dates and amounts. He scrolled through in silence, occasionally making notes on his tablet. "This is impressively thorough," he said finally. "Most people in your situation would have spotty records at best. But you've documented everything like you were expecting to need it someday." "Force of habit," I admitted. "In my work, documentation is everything. Clients trust you with their wealth because you can show them exactly where every dollar goes and why. I just applied the same principle to my personal situation." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's going to make my job easier, but I'm still going to need to verify everything independently. Courts and public opinion both require third-party validation. You can't just present your own records and expect people to believe them without corroboration." He outlined what he called a comprehensive financial lifestyle audit. He'd verify every payment I'd made through bank records and business filings. He'd document Vanessa's spending patterns through credit card statements and purchase records. He'd visit the locations where she spent money, the boutiques and spas and restaurants, establishing a pattern of luxury consumption that couldn't be supported by Dad's pension alone. He'd even photograph the house, the cars, the country club, creating a visual record of the lifestyle I'd been funding. "But here's what's really going to matter," Marcus said, leaning forward. "The contrast. I need to document your lifestyle too. The modest apartment, the practical car, the reasonable spending habits. The story isn't just that you funded them, it's that you lived simply while they lived extravagantly on your dime. That's what's going to resonate when this becomes public." Public. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "You think this is going to become public knowledge?" I said. It wasn't really a question. Marcus gave me a look that suggested I already knew the answer. "Maya, your stepmother is a social climber who's built her entire identity on status and appearances. When you pull the rug out from under that, do you really think she's going to handle it quietly? This is going to explode, and when it does, you want to be the one controlling the narrative." He was right, and I knew it. Vanessa wouldn't accept being exposed as someone who'd been living on borrowed money, especially not borrowed from the stepdaughter she'd been openly dismissing. She'd fight back with everything she had, which meant I needed to be prepared for warfare, the kind fought with evidence and public perception rather than weapons. By the time I met with Patricia and Gwyn on Monday, Marcus had already started his investigation. Patricia's office was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome with a view that rivaled my own. She was in her mid-40s, composed and direct in a way that immediately put me at ease. "Gregory speaks highly of you," she said after we'd settled into her conference room. "He rarely sends people my way unless the situation is both complicated and worth resolving properly." I walked Patricia through the entire arrangement, watching her take notes in precise handwriting on a legal pad. She asked detailed questions about the trusts I'd established, the LLCs I'd created, and the various financial instruments I'd used to funnel money toward my father's household without his knowledge of the source. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Everything you've done is legally sound," she said finally. "The trusts are properly structured, the business entities are legitimate, and you've kept meticulous records of every transaction. From a legal standpoint, you're protected. But Maya, and I need you to understand this clearly, once you reveal this situation, you can't unravel it. Your relationship with your father will fundamentally change. Your stepmother will likely never forgive you. And depending on how this plays out publicly, your own reputation could take hits you haven't anticipated." I'd considered all of this during the sleepless nights since Thanksgiving, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with no clear solution. But every time I thought about walking away and maintaining the status quo, I remembered Vanessa's voice at that dinner table. The family charity case. Bless her heart, she tries so hard. The casual cruelty of someone so secure in their superiority that they didn't even recognize it as cruelty. "I understand the risks," I told Patricia. "But I can't keep living like this, funding my own humiliation. She needs to know the truth, and my father needs to understand what's really been happening. He thinks some anonymous charity has been helping him. He has no idea his daughter has been carrying this weight for 3 years. Patricia nodded slowly, then pulled out a fresh legal pad. Then we need to plan this carefully. The revelation needs to happen in a controlled environment where you have support and documentation readily available. We need to anticipate every possible response and have countermeasures prepared. And most importantly, we need to protect your father in all of this. He's the innocent party who's going to be caught in the middle. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a strategy that felt more like preparing for a military campaign than a family confrontation. Marcus compiled his investigation into a comprehensive report complete with photographs, verified financial records, and a timeline that showed the exact correlation between my payments and Vanessa's lifestyle upgrades. Patricia drafted legal documents that would protect both me and my father, including a formal dissolution of the financial support structure and clear documentation of what had been gifts versus what might be considered loans. But the critical piece came from an unexpected source. Sophie, the housekeeper who'd worked for my father since before he married Vanessa, reached out to me through a carefully worded text. "We need to talk about Mrs. Chen. I have things you should know." We met at a small park away from Riverside Heights, where Sophie wouldn't be recognized by anyone in Vanessa's social circle. Sophie had been keeping her own records, it turned out. Not financial ones, but something potentially more damaging. She documented 3 years of Vanessa's private behavior, the things she said when she thought only the hired help could hear. The cruel jokes about my father's modest background. The complaints about his lack of ambition and earning potential. The phone calls to her friends where she described their marriage as a temporary inconvenience until she could position herself better in Riverside Heights society. "She talks about him like he's a stepping stone," Sophie said, her hands twisted together in her lap. "And she talks about you like you're some kind of burden he should have cut loose years ago. I've worked for your father for 8 years, Maya. He's a good man. He deserves to know what kind of person he married." Sophie had recordings. Not many, she was careful to emphasize, just a few instances where Vanessa's voice had carried from the living room to the kitchen, captured inadvertently by the home security systems Sophie had access to for her cleaning duties. Patricia reviewed them and confirmed they were legally obtained, since Vanessa had no reasonable expectation of privacy in the common areas of her own home, especially with a security system she'd insisted on installing herself. The recordings were damning. In one, Vanessa complained to a friend about how boring my father was, how she'd thought a teacher would have more intellectual depth but he just wanted to putter around in his workshop. In another, she laughed about my small apartment and basic car, suggesting I was probably making barely above minimum wage despite my claims of working in finance. The worst one was from just 2 weeks ago, after that disastrous lunch where she'd offered me the loan. "Robert actually expects me to be grateful he has a daughter," Vanessa's voice came through crystal clear on the recording. "As if Maya is some kind of asset instead of a reminder that he had an entire life before me. She's nearly 30 and still needs us to worry about her future. It's exhausting, honestly. Thank God we're in a position to help her, even if she's too proud to accept it properly. The position to help me. Built entirely on my money." The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Patricia and Marcus both agreed the recordings added crucial context, showing not just what Vanessa had received but how little she valued the people providing it. But Gregory, when I showed him everything we'd compiled, had a different observation. "This is powerful evidence," he said, reviewing the materials in his study. "But evidence alone won't create the impact you're looking for. You need a moment, Maya. A public setting where the truth can't be dismissed or swept under the rug. Somewhere Vanessa values, where her social standing matters to her. That's where you need to make your revelation." The Riverside Charity Gala was less than 3 weeks away. It was the social event of the season, where the community's elite gathered to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy and vie for recognition. Vanessa had been talking about it for months, particularly because she'd somehow managed to position herself on the planning committee and had been angling for an award. The Philanthropist of the Year recognition, which came with a public presentation and speech. "She's going to accept an award for philanthropy," I said slowly, the irony of it settling over me like a physical weight. "Using money I provided, at an event celebrating charitable giving." Gregory's smile was sharp as a knife. "Now that is what I call poetic justice. Patricia, can we make this work legally? Patricia considered for a moment, then nodded. If we position it correctly, yes. Maya would be attending a public charity event where her stepmother is giving a public speech. If Maya chooses that moment to make her own public statement, backed by verifiable documentation, there's nothing legally questionable about it. We'd want to give the charity organizers advance notice so they're not blindsided, but the venue itself is perfect. Marcus added his perspective. The media will already be there covering the event. Local news, society reporters, probably some regional press. If we prepare press packets with the documented evidence, we can control the narrative from the start. Vanessa won't be able to spin this as a private family dispute when the receipts are literally being handed to journalists. The plan solidified over the following days. I would attend the gala, which I'd already been invited to through my work at Sterling and Associates. Gregory would be there as one of the event's major sponsors, providing both social weight and a safety net if things went sideways. Patricia and Marcus would be present with all documentation prepared and organized. Sophie had agreed to provide a statement if needed, her loyalty to my father overriding any obligation to Vanessa. But there was one element I insisted on that made everyone uncomfortable. I wanted my father to know beforehand. Not everything, not the full extent of the revelation I was planning, but enough that he wouldn't be blindsided. Patricia argued against it, concerned he might warn Vanessa or try to stop the entire thing. Gregory worried it would complicate matters unnecessarily. But I held firm. He's my father, I said. He deserves the chance to hear this from me first, even if it's just the basics. I won't let him find out at the same time as everyone else that his entire life for the past 3 years has been built on his daughter's secret support. We compromised on timing. I would tell him the day before the gala, giving him enough time to process but not enough time to change the course of events already set in motion. It felt like a betrayal and a kindness all at once, which seemed appropriate for a situation where every choice came with consequences I couldn't fully predict. The day before the gala, I drove to the house I'd been secretly paying for and found my father in his workshop behind the garage. It was the one space Vanessa never entered, too dusty and unfashionable for her tastes. Dad was sanding a piece of cherry wood, working on what looked like a jewelry box. He smiled when he saw me, that warm genuine expression that reminded me why I'd done all of this in the first place. We talked about nothing for a while, his current project and my work, the weather turning colder as December approached. Then I told him I needed to discuss something important, and I watched the smile fade from his face as worry replaced it. He set down his tools and gave me his full attention, the same way he used to when I was young and needed to confess something difficult. Dad, I started, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Do you remember 3 years ago when you were struggling with the mortgage and medical bills, and I told you about that retired educator's assistance program? He nodded slowly, confusion creasing his forehead. The one that helped restructure everything and covered the expenses insurance wouldn't handle. It was a miracle, really. We would have lost the house without it. I took a breath and made myself say the words I'd been rehearsing for days. There was no program, Dad. It was me. All of it has been me. The mortgage assistance, the medical fund, the financial support that's kept this household running. I'd been paying for everything for 3 years. The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours instead of seconds. My father stared at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, shock and disbelief mixing with something that might have been hurt or maybe shame. Maya, that's not possible. The amounts involved, the documentation, there was an entire organization. An organization I created, I said gently. LLCs and trusts and business accounts designed to look official because I knew you'd never accept direct help from me. You would have felt like you were burdening your daughter, so I made it look like strangers were helping you instead. He sat down heavily on his work stool, the color draining from his face. Why would you do that? Why would you let me believe I was accepting charity from strangers instead of telling me the truth? Because you were drowning, Dad, and too proud to admit it. Because Vanessa's expectations were destroying you financially and I couldn't watch that happen. Because I love you and I had the means to help, even if you wouldn't have let me if you'd known. The hurt in his eyes was worse than I'd anticipated. So you've been lying to me for 3 years. letting me feel grateful to anonymous donors while my own daughter was secretly paying my bills like I was some kind of charity case. The words hit harder because they echoed what Vanessa had called me, that same phrase turned back around. Not a charity case, I said firmly. My family. The person who raised me and supported me and deserved better than to be stressed into an early grave trying to afford a lifestyle his new wife insisted on. His hands were shaking now, and I saw the moment when understanding fully dawned. Vanessa. She doesn't know, does she? She has no idea that her country club membership, her shopping trips, her entire social climbing existence has been funded by you. I shook my head. She thinks you've been supporting us both. She thinks I'm barely making ends meet in my tiny apartment while you two are living comfortably on your pension and investments. The workshop was absolutely silent except for the sound of wind moving through the trees outside. What investments? He finally asked, his voice hollow. I don't have investments beyond the basic retirement account. That's what I thought, I said quietly. But Vanessa has told her friends multiple times about your successful investment portfolio. She's built an entire fiction about your financial situation, Dad, and you've been too exhausted to correct her. He put his head in his hands, and I saw my father truly break for the first time in my life. I felt like such a failure, he whispered. Unable to provide the life she wanted, constantly worried about money, watching her spend and knowing I couldn't actually afford any of it but too ashamed to admit it. I thought if I just worked harder, figured things out better, I could eventually catch up. You were never the failure in this equation, I said, kneeling beside him so I could see his face. Tomorrow night at the gala, Vanessa is receiving an award for philanthropy. She's going to stand on that stage and accept recognition for charitable giving while wearing jewelry I bought and driving a car I'm paying for. I can't let that happen without people knowing the truth, Dad. I can't keep living this lie. He looked at me then with something like fear. What are you planning to do? Tell the truth, I said simply. With documentation, with evidence, with everything verified and legal. I'm going to let everyone know that the family charity case has actually been the family benefactor all along, and I'm done being treated like I'm something to be pitted or fixed. My father sat with that information for a long moment, processing implications I could see moving across his face. This will destroy her, he finally said. Not a protest, just a statement of fact. Her reputation, her social standing, everything she's built here will collapse. I know, I acknowledged. But Dad, what she's built is hollow. It's built on money she didn't earn, contempt for people supporting her, and a complete disregard for reality. Maybe it's time for that to collapse. He was quiet for another minute, then asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you want me to stop you? I could. I could tell her tonight, give her a chance to prepare or avoid the gala entirely. The fact that he was offering, that he was putting the choice in my hands even after everything I'd just revealed, reminded me exactly why I'd protected him in the first place. No, I said. I need you to let this happen. And then afterward, I need you to decide what kind of life you actually want, separate from what Vanessa has convinced you that you need. He nodded slowly, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. I'll be there tomorrow night, he said. I don't know what I'll do or say, but I'll be there. That's all I'm asking, I told him. The Riverside Charity Gala was everything Vanessa had promised it would be. The grand Riverside Hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. 400 guests an evening were mingled with champagne glasses. The social elite of our community gathered to celebrate their own generosity. I arrived in a dress I'd borrowed from a colleague, elegant but understated, my hair styled simply. I looked exactly like what I was, a young professional attending a work function, not someone about to detonate a social bomb. Gregory found me within minutes, distinguished in his tuxedo, playing the role of wealthy patron with practiced ease. Patricia and Marcus were positioned near the media area, press packets prepared and organized. Sophie had provided her statement that morning, notarized and legally sound. Everything was ready, and there was no turning back now. Vanessa held court near the silent auction tables, resplendent in a gown that cost more than some people's monthly salaries. The $15,000 bracelet caught the light every time she gestured, and she was gesturing constantly, animated and excited in a way I'd rarely seen. This was her moment, the culmination of 3 years of social climbing and strategic positioning. She'd finally achieved the recognition she craved. Dad stood off to the side, nursing a drink and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Our eyes met across the room and he gave me a small nod, acknowledgement without approval. That would have to be enough. The awards presentation began after dinner. Various community members were recognized for their charitable contributions, each one walking to the stage to accept their plaque and give a brief speech. Vanessa's category was last, Philanthropist of the Year, saved for maximum impact. When her name was called, she practically floated to the stage, beaming with genuine joy. She gave her speech with practiced grace, thanking the committee and talking about the importance of giving back to the community. She mentioned how fortunate she and her husband were to be in a position to help others, how gratifying it was to make a difference. The audience applauded warmly, and she was preparing to leave the stage when I stood up. Before Vanessa steps down, I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom in the sudden quiet, I have something the community should know about her philanthropy. Heads turned toward me, confusion rippling through the crowd. Vanessa froze on stage, her smile locked in place but her eyes sharp with warning. The MC looked uncertain. Miss, this isn't the appropriate time for public comments. Actually, I said, walking toward the stage with Gregory beside me for support, it's the perfect time. Vanessa is being honored for generosity and charitable giving. The community deserves to know where the resources for that generosity actually came from. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Maya, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said, reaching the stage and accepting the microphone the confused MC handed over. I'm embarrassing you, and it's long overdue. I pulled out the tablet Patricia had prepared, connected it to the presentation screen behind the stage. My name is Maya Chen, and for the past 3 years, I've been anonymously funding every aspect of the lifestyle my stepmother has used to build her reputation in this community. The screen lit up with the first financial document, a mortgage payment record showing transfers from my business account. The ballroom had gone completely silent. I've paid the mortgage on the house she calls home. I've covered the country club membership she uses for networking. I've funded the credit cards she uses for the designer wardrobe she's wearing tonight. Every charitable donation she's made, every philanthropic gesture she's been recognized for, has been possible because I've been quietly supporting her lifestyle while she publicly dismisses me as a failure. Vanessa tried to speak but no sound came out. The evidence continued scrolling on the screen behind us. 3 years of payments and transfers, each one dated and verified. Medical expenses for my father that she told her friends were covered by his investments. The luxury vehicle she drives, the jewelry she wears, even the gown she's wearing right now, all funded by the stepdaughter she calls the family charity case. Patricia stepped forward then, handing packets to the media representatives while Marcus displayed the corroborating evidence he'd gathered. Sophie's statement appeared on screen, followed by the audio recording of Vanessa's voice discussing how fortunate they were to be in a position to help me, when in reality it had been the reverse all along. My father stood up in the audience, and I saw tears on his face. I hadn't wanted to hurt him, but the truth had required this public airing. Vanessa finally found her voice, shrill and desperate. This is a lie, a setup. She's always been jealous of what Robert and I have built together. What you've built, I said calmly, is a fiction. And it's built entirely on my bank account. The gala dissolved into chaos after that, conversations erupting throughout the ballroom. Vanessa fled the stage, and my father intercepted her in the lobby. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw her face crumble as whatever illusions remained were finally stripped away. 3 months later, my father filed for divorce. He moved into a modest condo and returned to substitute teaching, rediscovering a sense of purpose he'd lost. We have lunch every Wednesday, rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of secrets. Vanessa left Riverside Heights entirely, her social standing destroyed beyond repair. The house was sold, the proceeds split fairly in the divorce settlement. I stopped all financial support the day after the gala, and the carefully constructed empire collapsed exactly as predicted. I still work at Sterling and Associates, still live in my small apartment, still drive my practical car. But now when people see me, they see someone who had the means and the intelligence to support an entire household while living modestly herself. The family charity case turned out to be the family foundation, and sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people see the truth they were too blind to notice before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.